hand over the session now to Dr. Naveen Kumar to chair, and he'll introduce our speaker for today, Mr. Vishwesh. Uh, Before we go on, I request you that we're going to put your mics on mute, and you may not be able to unmute yourself for a little while. After the didactic is over, we'll then open the session to take questions. I should mention that we also have a few people who are joining us from NIMHANS in the place where we usually conduct the caregivers program. So welcome to them as well. So I hand over the session to Dr. Naveen sir.
Thank you, Deepak, and it's our pleasure to welcome Mr. Vishwesh Shekhar, who's our resource person for today. Mr. Shekhar is an advocate and is currently pursuing his PhD in the Symbiosis University of Pune, and also he is the board member of the Guardianship Committee of the National Trust Act. So it's a pleasure, sir. Welcome you, and
thank you very much.
Mr. Shekhar will take about say 10-15 minutes for his didactic presentation, and then I would be requesting Dr. Harish to give some additional comments, and then the topic will be open for discussion. Now it's over to you.
Just give us a minute while we share the. Is everybody able to see the slides? You can give us a thumbs up if you are able to see. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. Now, the main theme of this program was what after me, the legal aspects of what will happen to a person's property, how would a person who's a caregiver or a parent of a person with intellectual disability or any other kind of mental illness take care of his child or ward after his passing. Now, firstly, I would like to start by saying what I am going to talk about specifically relates to Karnataka. That is the first warning I'd like to give you. Secondly, I would also like to state that I would be talking about guardianship. Second, I would be talking about wills. Third, I'll be talking about trusts. And fourth, I'll be talking about high support needs and then conclude. Now, the first point I'd like to make here is the difference between as to what guardianship is. We will look at what guardianship is first. Guardianship is something that has been amended recently by the newly enacted Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. Section 14 of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act very clearly states, notwithstanding anything else in any other law for the time being in force, Section 14 shall prevail. Section 14 is the provision that provides for guardianship for persons with disabilities. Disabilities covered under the RPD, that is the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. Now, that is one aspect of guardianship. The second aspect of guardianship is provided for under the National Trust Act. The National Trust Act covers cerebral palsy, mental retardation, multiple disabilities, and autism. There are two guardianships. Now, the RPD again makes it very clear that limited guardianship is the only guardianship available now. It cannot be unlimited guardianship. The National Trust Act is quiet on this aspect as to whether the guardianship shall be complete or limited. The RPD has made it very clear that it shall be only limited guardianship, and this limited guardianship shall be for the purposes of helping a person with disability to make legally binding decisions. These legally binding decisions shall be made with the will and the consent of the person with disability. This is the most important factor when we consider guardianship of a person with disability. This is point number one. Point number two, I would like to talk about wills. Now, lot of us always wonder what will happen. What will happen to us after we pass away, and what we will be doing with our properties. One of the ways of dealing with property after one's demise is by leaving a will. A will is just a document that takes effect after the death of a person, leaving the property of that person to a given beneficiary or a given set of beneficiaries, with an executor being appointed, so that the executor can execute the desires of the testator or the person who made the will. Now, making a will is a relatively simple thing. Anybody can make a will. No stamp paper is required. The cost of making a will in Karnataka is 800 rupees. That includes the registration fee. No stamp paper, I mean, as in it does not depend on the value of the property left by the will. 500 rupees is only the stamp paper required, plus the registration fee, which works out to 800 rupees. So if you actually leave property worth a crore, or even if you leave a property worth 10,000 rupees, the stamp duty you pay is 500 rupees. That is one advantage of having a will. But the point with the will is that it will take effect only after the demise of the person. The second alternative to leaving property for a person, especially with intellectual disability or other mental disability, is by forming a trust. Unlike a will, a trust can be made when the person is alive and can take effect immediately. As in, the person making, the author of the trust need not die before the trust takes effect and the property is distributed as per the wishes of the trustee. A trustee can appoint any number of beneficiaries and people to administer the trust, so that the property is made use for the benefit of the person who has intellectual disability. But the disadvantage of making a trust is that sometimes it is irrevocable, and secondly, the stamp duty is slightly higher than that of a will. Then the next point I would like to talk about is, that's all. I don't have any more slides to show. Okay. Another point I would like to make here is about high support needs, for which I need Dr. Deepak's help. The RPD Act basically classifies persons with disabilities into three categories. One category is simpliciter person with disability, that is a person with disability less than 40%. Then a person with benchmark disability, that is a person with disability of 40% or more, and a person with disability with high support needs. How a person with high support needs is evaluated is actually a very medical exercise, but the factor is that a person with high support needs has to be a person with benchmark disabilities. I would request Dr. Deepak to kindly clarify as to how this entire exercise is done.
Let my colleague Dr. Harish will tell us a little bit about it.
So in the PWD Act, as Mr. Visvesh and Dr. Deepak is saying, that there is a concept called high support needs. government has acknowledged the importance of people who may have requirement of higher supports or more frequent supports compared with persons with benchmark disabilities, and hence this definition has been brought. And following experts' consensus and discussion, a format for assessment of who would be eligible for high support needs has been gazetted recently, and it would be evaluated at a district level by the appropriate medical authority constituted by the respective state government. So this high support needs, only a person who already has a benchmark disability can apply for evaluation. And in this, there is a format format procedure, and if a person is eligible, score of 60 out of 100 he should get, then the medical board would decide that the person is in need of high supports and would recommend appropriate supports. And there is also one more mention in the RPWD Act, is that caregiver allowance. So a person who would be eligible for high support needs, his carer would also be eligible for caregiver allowance, depending upon the restrictions laid down by respective state government.
There is one small thing I would like to add about the procedure for applying for guardianship. Now, under the RPWD Act, the government of Karnataka has very recently brought in rules. I think in the last week of September, Karnataka having the dubious distinction of probably being the last state to bring in the RPWD rules. Under the RPWD rules, rule number 6, the designated authority is the district collector to issue limited guardianship certificates. To apply for limited guardianship, you have to produce the person's disability certificate, the proposed guardian's income certificate, and Aadhaar card of both the parties, and file an application before the district collector, who will take up the matter and will interview the person with disabilities if the person with disability is in a position to answer questions, and ask about the desire of the person with disability, whether he would like to have the proposed guardian, to be appointed as his or her guardian. That is under the RPD Act. Under the National Trust Act, the local level committee takes this decision. Local level committee consists of one medical member, one legal member, one person with disability, one person from a recognized NGO, and some other members are there. Similarly, the RPDO committee also consists of 7 members, which is headed by the district collector of that particular district. This is the procedure. There is no fees for any of this, but there are particular forms appended to the NTA, that's the National Trust Act, and the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, under which you have to apply.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Vishwesh. Anything else, Harish, you would like to add?
Yeah. So this high supports, what exactly would be the high support supports would be provided by the respective state governments? We may have to still wait and watch, because in our understanding, any specific programs or plans designed specifically for somebody who is having high support needs have not been rolled out. So it may happen soon. But as the rules already have been published in state government of Karnataka, the high support, a person or a family who thinks that one of their family members is in requirement of high supports, if they already have a benchmark disability certificate, can approach the medical board, district medical board, for evaluation whether the person would suit for the high support needs or not.
Yeah, I think now the presenters have completed their job. Now it's up to the discussion. presenters have completed their job. Now it's up to the discussion. Now it's open to discussion. Any questions or queries? I think I saw some chats. So are there any questions that are already there? So yeah, I think now it's open for discussion. Participants may either raise their hands or
They can unmute themselves.
they can unmute themselves and ask questions. Also, Dr. Prabhu Jadhav is there in the other room. Prabhu, are there any questions from that side? Any clarifications? Yes, madam. I am seeing one hand with
Krishna. Miss Krishna, you can actually unmute yourself and
madam. You can unmute yourself and ask your question. Yeah, now it's unmuted.
Okay. You told about limited guardian. Apart from limited guardian, we can also form the trust, no? Both. What about trustees? When we have trustees, we can also appoint a limited guardian. That is different. This is different. Or
You can have a trust and a limited guardian, yes. Both are possible. But if you have a guardian, it has to be only a limited guardian.
okay. The limited guardian means is limited only to the legal aspect.
Limited only for the purposes of making legally binding decisions. That is the only.
How the user can how to manage some other financial things, day-to-day things. For that, can we appoint one more guardian?
You can appoint one guardian, but if you appoint more guardians, I don't think the law allows for more than one guardian to be appointed. Number two, there would be confusion if more than one guardian is appointed because there might be conflict of interest.
Oh, okay, then in that case we can form the trust deed.
Yes, you can.
Okay, thank you.
But then you should always remember that trust is, again, as the word itself goes, depends on trust.
That's
So
right.
you have to trust the trustees.
Yeah, you're right.
just one addition to that. In guardianship under the RPWD, the guardianship can provide for the maintenance of the person with disability as well. So that power is given under the RPWD Act. So the guardianship can provide for daily use, etc. That also amounts to a ability to take decisions in terms of spending money, things like that. The guardian can help with that. Any other questions?
So I didn't follow you. Will you please repeat?
The guardian can make provisions for the care of the person with disability if the person with disability is unable to take care of. But it is based on the fact that the person is unable to take care of it.
I see from staff raising their hands. Yes, sir, please go ahead.
Sir, please explain 40% disability, sir.
40% disability. Maybe Harish or Deepak can answer.
So what happens is that for all disability, for the disabilities under the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, there is a limit there's an amount of disability above which a person is deemed eligible to receive welfare benefits. So that limit is 40%. How that 40% is calculated depends on the type of disability that somebody has. So for people with intellectual disability or what used to be called mental retardation, it is an assessment of their IQ and their ability to function in their lives. So that assessment will be done usually by a professional, and this assessment will be will be looked at by the disability board before deciding whether the assessment crosses 40%. There is a different assessment for people with mental illness, which is a scale called the IDEA scale, which is the Indian Disability Evaluation and Assessment Scale. And again, there are a certain score above which the person is deemed to have 40% disability or benchmark disability. Similarly, for autism, there is a score that the government has gazetted, or a scale that the government has gazetted, called the ISA scale. And that ISA scale will be applied by somebody who is trained to apply it, and that score will be considered by the board that assesses disability, and then the person will be granted disability. So essentially what it means is that on the particular specific assessment of the person's disability, the person has scored 40% or more. And this is the current way to apply for an assessment of disability is through the unique disability ID system, where you have to apply online. So essentially that is what 40% disability means.
Yeah, I think it's clear. Anything?
Does anybody have any questions about?
I do have a couple of questions. I'm Susan. I'm a caregiver to my son. Okay, the first question is this disability certificate. Is it necessary that the person should have it for the will to be stronger, or to set a trustee board? The second question is, I've heard that the person who has the illness has got the right to choose the guardian. It has to go through, he has to agree, he or she. The third question is, who can be on the trustee board? Is it mandated, or it's our wish, whoever can be on the trustee board?
One by one, I think would you be able to answer?
Yes. Could you repeat your questions one by one, please?
Okay, the first question, is it necessary that the person should have a disability certificate to make the will stronger and to set up a trust board?
Whose will?
Sorry, no.
Your will to leave the property to your disabled child.
Yes.
The will not be affected by not having a disability certificate, but it is always better. It is always better because in the will you are going to narrate somewhere saying that the property is going to go for the welfare of such and such disabled person. When you narrate that in the will, somebody might later question saying, where is the certificate of disability? Do I make myself clear?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. The second question is, does the person have to agree to a guardian? So that's what I've heard.
The person with disability has a choice to say whether he or she wants a particular person as a guardian or not as a guardian under the RPD Act, provided that person's disability is of such a nature that he or she can understand the question and answer the question. Under the RPD Act, the choice is given, provided that the person can understand, comprehend and answer the question.
Okay, thank you. And the third question is, is there a mandate that there will be certain people on the trust board, or it can be anybody that the family wants?
A trust is a voluntarily created instrument. You can have anybody as trustee you want. There is no particular person that you should have as trustee or you should not have as trustee, provided that they are not minors. There are certain legal hassles, but otherwise anybody can become trustee to any trust. Minors and some other people are disqualified, but otherwise you can have anybody as trustee.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you. There's one question from chat. Mr. Gangadhar, who is asking, can you please explain the procedure for forming trust, which is similar to what the question that Ms. Suzanne asked. So, Mr. Gangadhar, does that satisfy you, or would you like to hear? Would you have a specific question about trust that you want the speaker to answer?
Yeah, how to form the trust actually? What is the procedure?
A trust is basically formed by somebody called the settler. The settler or the author of the trust. The author of the trust will say, I have, say for example, 3 houses, and these 3 houses shall go to, first house shall go to son A, second house shall go to daughter B, third house shall go to son C. Like that, he will make a document. He will get it registered before the sub-registrar. And the A, B and C, the children are beneficiaries. And they can enjoy the benefit of the property when the settler is alive. Unlike a will where he has to die before they can enjoy the property. He has to put it in a stamp paper, pay the stamp duty, get it registered before the jurisdictional sub-registrar's office.
But to take help from some advocate or a lawyer, how do we?
You would need a help of an advocate, yes, unfortunately, yes.
Okay, but there are some special advocates for this, or we can go to any advocate like that?
You can go to any advocate, sir. It is a fairly simple procedure,
Okay.
but you have to trust the advocate. That,
Thank you.
Mr. Rakesh Singhal, sir, do you have any question?
Is there any condition of minimum number of trustees in the trust, in the form of trust? And can I and my wife can be trustees? Because I have got 2 children with mental illness.
Minimum number, and can parents themselves be?
parents themselves can be trustees, yes.
Yes.
There is no minimum number. I mean, 2 is sufficient.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Sachdeva, sir, do you have any question? Mr. Sachdeva?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to ask that you have talked about trusting the trustees. Besides trusting them, will there be any kind of audit so that they should not be able to breach the trust? What kind of trust? Is it? I think it is legal. And will some audit be carried out from government side?
If the trustees actually breach the obligations and do something that they are not supposed to do, you can always take them to court and sue them. But that is a long drawn and painful procedure. You can always take action against them. You can take legal action against them under the Indian Penal Code. You can take civil action against them. There are legal actions open to you. But those are painful procedures and they're long drawn procedures.
No, that's okay. But point is, who will be monitoring the trust from our side? Because later in case things go wrong, then we can take action, any sort of legal action. But
Yes.
constant monitoring is required to be done. So who will be doing the monitoring?
The author of the trust, firstly.
No, but besides, will there, because it will be a legal trust, will there be any involvement of government agency for monitoring?
There will not be any government agency unless there are tax implications.
But something, unsure, I think.
There is no government. You cannot ask the government to supervise the trust for you. No. If it is a private trust, no. A public trust, yes. The public trusts are governed by the Public Trusts and Charities Act. That is a different thing. A private trust is completely a private arrangement.
That means, but we have to just trust them. That's it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, if I may answer this question. Suppose a parent has formed a trust.
Yes.
And kind of expected that the trust will take care of
The child.
property in favor of the child.
Yes.
Suppose the parent passes away.
Yes.
Now the trust has to take care of the child.
Correct.
So the anxiety for a parent is that what if the trustees don't take care of the property? If it comes to the notice of somebody, they may sue them. But is it possible that nobody will take care? I mean, the expectation from the parent is that if there is annual audit or something like that.
There will be an annual audit of the trust. There will be an annual audit of the trust. Whether it is a private or a public trust, audits are compulsory because you have to file returns. Monetarily, audits are compulsory. But other kinds of misappropriation might be difficult to find out unless the original trust is drafted properly and you have safety clauses for which you have to talk to a good lawyer and put in the safety clauses or safety valves so that this kind of misappropriation which may escape the annual accounting process is avoided.
Is there an example that you can give of a safety thing that a parent can?
It depends from fact to fact. It depends on.
So with the continuation of Sir has raised, I will raise some quite vague. The parents are alive, no property are there, so they will register trust after the death of parents. My child responsibility should take the state because state has assured that dignity, secure all those things. After the death of parents, the will or trust will act. So who is going to be responsible in this condition?
1 second, sir. They don't have any property.
No property.
Then what are they going to leave in trust?
Trust in the sense, my child should be take care of the state. I am believing that. And how long I am alive,
You will take care.
that's the responsibility of the parents. After the death of parents, this responsibility shifting to the state.
I think there is some provision in the Mental Health Care Act now for taking care of destitute mentally ill patients, correct, doctor?
Yeah.
There is statutory provision. There is statutory provision.
As per the provisions of the Mental Health Care Act, enough number of long stay homes, short stay homes and convalescent homes need to be constructed by the government.
The parents don't have to do any trust or anything. The state
Automatically
becomes the
Trustees.
But your query is, they will expect quality, dignity.
That quality, dignity, all that is subject matter of a writ petition, a public interest writ petition in the High Court which is pending.
Also, the quality and dignity, everything is the obligation of the state. Now, after the implementation of the Mental Health Care Act, 2017 is a rights-based legislation, and there are a number of rights that have been listed. And what you said, those things also have come, ensuring the dignity and safety of the person with mental illness.
autonomy also.
Yeah, autonomy. So all those come under the purview of the Mental Health Care Act.
Mr. Agastya.
Sir, Mr. Agastya, do you have any questions, sir? Yes, sir.
I typed out on the chat a kind of a query or a clarification.
Right.
See, the RPD Act is focused on mainly the physical disabilities. I mean, in its formation and all that. Let me complete because there's a common question across many of the caregivers.
Is that
The person who is mentally ill, if he or she has to go to a hospital or to a doctor and say, please certify me as mentally disabled. Okay. Now it's a painful process for the person because the social stigma still continues. Now, is there any way by which a less painful process can be made so that within the provisions of the law or probably in the course of some amendment, whether this can be made so that the person is not feeling hurt in the process of getting a right which is his or her right?
you would like to respond, or I?
Sir, I understand your sentiment in the sense that it is kind of painful for a person to go ask for a disability certificate. Sometimes even the certifying authority is on the 3rd floor and you have to use a wheelchair to go to the 3rd floor. All those problems are there. But one thing is, compared to the 95 Act, the 2016 Act is based on the UNCRPD, which is a rights-based model. So in that sense, there is a slight improvement in the sense that the whole approach has now become rights-based. That is number one. Number two, it is wrong to say that the RPD Act is only physical disabilities now. If you look at the schedule, a whole lot of disabilities have been mentioned, which include mental disability, which include mood disorders, which include learning disabilities, which include acid attack victims. So the spectrum of disability has gone up. So I think in that sense it's a positive development. Yes, unfortunately, some of it, especially the valuation, still is on the medical side, the medical model, about which as a law student, as a PhD student, I have my complaints, but I am surrounded by doctors, I do not want to antagonize them.
Feel free.
You can.
I think answer for your question. Now UDAD is, if you feel your relative is suffering from disability, I think you log into the UDAD Swavalamban and fill the form. Simple process is there. You have to update your Aadhaar card, Aadhaar e-copy, then your signature and photo. I think within 1 month, within the period of 30 days, they will call to you and they will fix an appointment. That's the process. It is in infancy stage. I think duration of the course will stabilize the process. I think that's going to sort out some of the issues. Instead of going to ask you to request to the doctor, you only raise the request through online mode.
Thank you, that's useful.
So just to add on to that, sir, as I think I also agree that perhaps running around hospitals will be less if you start applying online, but anyway it will be limited people who can have some kind of technological knowledge. It may not be useful for everybody, but if it is supported by somebody else, they can do it at their home without doing anything. And there is one thing that is called Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act based rules, which were released following the act, which says that within a period of 30 days, it will be the responsibility of the appropriate authority to ensure that assessment has been carried out. So that also adds one more layer of comfort. The third thing is, whenever there is the act clearly states that it is the state disability commissioner who has to enforce the law as well as protect the rights. So whenever there is any inconvenience or any kind of grievances, they can approach the state disability commissioner even by filing an online complaint, which I think they will help in reducing any kind of grievances.
Thank you, Harish. And you want to also?
I think there is something that I would like to add, just before we look at the next question, is that the unique disability ID is now likely to be the only way that in which somebody can access disability certificates across the country. And I think this is something that caregiver organizations should take up and ask for in terms of certain rights, because at the moment, the software as it works now limits you to being assessed for disability in a hospital in your district. So, however, the RPWD Act itself states plainly that it should either be in the person's local health facility or it should be in the hospital from which the person is seeking treatment for a number of years. Now, currently, this second specification, that the hospital which the person is taking treatment from for a number of years, this is not possible under the current application system. I think this is something that caregivers should advocate for. That is something that should be a change. I think this is a discussion we have had with many of our colleagues have had with authorities, and it would make more meaning if caregivers ask for this rather than more mental health professionals. So I think that is something that I think caregivers should take up and request as their right.
Thanks, Deepak. I think there is a question from the staff group.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon. Can you hear me? My name is Yogu Rao. My name is Yogu Rao. I just like to ask about the definition, if any, of a caregiver, and whether it is in the confines of the law, and if so, who is a caregiver, And deriving from it very quickly a small further clarification, what is the caregiver's allowance deriving from it? And high caregiver and so forth. This is just a flow from the first question. My question is, I hope very simple.
Yes, sir. You would like to answer or? Caregiver, as per the Mental Health Care Act, sir, it is given that caregiver means a person who resides with a person with mental illness and is responsible for providing care to that person and includes a relative or any other person who performs this function, either free or with remuneration. That is the definition.
So it includes family members
Yes.
and the NGOs who take care of.
Yeah, either for free or with remuneration.
Yeah, with remuneration.
Yeah.
So, the next half was about caregiver allowance. Was it?
Caregiver allowance, I don't think it's mentioned in Mental Health Care Act.
Allowance is not defined.
Yeah.
It is not defined, but it is mentioned in the RPW Act for high support needs.
Okay.
So in that context, who is a caregiver? Is a caregiver mentioned in the RPWD Act also?
Yes.
High support needs.
Same definition.
And who has to pay this allowance?
State
State has to pay.
There's a question. Sir, is your question answered, sir?
No, it's a corollary to what you have kindly said. If there is a caregiver's allowance and the definition of a caregiver having been defined, how is it quantified? What is the scale, if any, or is it still in the formative stage? That's all.
No, it is in a formative stage. Especially the allowance aspect of it, the government has not so far done any, has not taken any particular actions on that issue. I think your question will become extremely pertinent once the allowances are announced. Then if there are 2 or 3 people who are taking care of a person and their allowance is announced by the government, which of the caregivers will receive it? I think we have to wait for the specific regulations which may be announced by the government when it announces a program to give caregiver allowance. Until then, for many other purposes, this definition holds good.
Is that okay, sir?
Thank you. My last thought is about mental health insurance, which has been made statutory. And to what extent has it started to be implemented in the country, if any information is available on that? Just a question. The thought,
I think mental health insurance, I don't think it is mentioned in Disability Act. It comes under the Mental Health Care Act, and it is slightly out of the purview of today's discussion.
We will have a
separate session on mental health insurance, sir. Because as of now, it's too early for anything, to be there.
I appreciate it. Thank you for organizing this wonderful function in this meeting. Many more of this is so thoughtful of you. Very grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, I think the staff group has one question. Please go ahead, sir. Okay. Scarf group? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So if the person with mental illness, with a diagnosed mental health disorder has the capacity, right? Now there's a lot of focus on capacity as far as the Mental Health Care Act is concerned. Can he or she actually take care of, say, his own? Can he manage his or her own property, money, and so on? So, like in such a situation, as the previous caregiver had asked this question, in case the family passes on without, writing a will or forming a trust, and if this person has capacity, does the law allow him or her to manage their own property, money, and so on?
Yeah, I think thanks for the question. Would you like to respond to that?
In the absence of a certificate, I don't think there is any hurdle for a person to manage his or her own property at all.
No, what madam is asking is the patient has been diagnosed with a mental illness,
Legal capacity, if legal capacity is proved, then there is no hurdle. Because guardianship arises only when there is a problem with legal capacity. Once he has legal capacity, then he does not require a guardian and he can take care of his or her own property. There is no issue.
Madam, is that okay or? Hello? Hello? Ma'am, is that okay?
Yeah. As a follow-through question, now
Yeah.
suppose someone, say for example, you have a family with two sons. The parents die without writing a will. Of course, then Inheritance Act takes over. There's equal division of the property. But if if the well sibling decides that my brother is sick and he cannot have any property, despite having capacity, what kind of role does the well sibling have in actually, countering the person's ability to manage his own property?
I'm sorry, madam, could you repeat your question?
Okay, I'll paraphrase it again. See, you have a situation where there is a family with more than one child. That means there are two sons.
All right.
Both the sons can equally inherit the father's property.
Correct.
By the Inheritance Act.
Correct.
But one of the sons is suffering from mental illness
All right.
and has a capacity.
All right.
So, by your argument earlier, because he has a capacity, he doesn't have a certificate, he can manage his own property.
All right.
But there are instances.
He can also sue.
Yes, he can also sue. Right.
Yes.
But unfortunately, we've also encountered situations where the well brother just takes away the property and there is no legal protection for the person with mental illness despite having capacity.
Madam, the only option open to the other brother is to sue his sibling.
Okay.
Now, if he wants legal help, then the other roundabout way of going about this is to get himself certified as mentally ill and seek legal aid and then approach the court.
Okay.
That is a possibility.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good.
Because a mentally ill person is entitled to legal aid. Free legal aid.
Okay.
Just one addition to that, just because somebody is certified for mental illness does not mean that they lack capacity.
Right.
So they have a certificate of disability for mental illness, but it is assumed that they have capacity until the authority designates them as not having. So anybody with mental illness and a disability certificate, it's not automatically that they lack capacity. The default is that they have capacity, and the authority must state specifically that they do not have capacity for them to require guardianship or any other kind of.
Okay, ma'am.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So, any other queries, Deepak?
Maybe there's a question. Ms. Sujata, you can unmute yourself and ask your question, madam. Miss Sujata Ranganathan, you can.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please.
Okay. So under Swavlamban, I had applied for the UID and I've gone through the assessments. It's been completed. So I'm able to view the disability card online and the status shows that it has been sent for printing or whatever. So, but the online card, it does say that it is valid for 5 years only. Is that the usual case? Or is this something new which is happening currently?
Yeah, I think the medical authority should certify whether the certificate is temporary or permanent. If it is temporary, for how long it is valid? The medical authority has a obligation and a right to mention that in the certificate.
And that valid, sir, as per the digital initiation government of India, whatever you are downloaded the e-certificate, it's valid. And it will come after 45 days as per the rules they are showing. It will send to through courier to your whatever address you are given or uploaded in the documents.
Okay, so in the interim, this is also a valid card.
Right,
Right?
you can avail the services through that certificate.
Okay, thank you.
Just to also one clarification on this is that the rules also specify a certain period of time in which assessments have to be done periodically when it comes to people below the age of 18. For example, for those with intellectual disability and those with specific learning disability, there are specified ages under the rules which say that assessment should be done at this period of time. So again, below the age of 18, people may have to actually get a reassessment done. After the age of 18, then it will
consider as a permanent.
Is that okay, ma'am?
Sure, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next question. Again, Scarf Group has one more question. Please go ahead, madam.
Sir, the patient has transferred his property wrongfully due to his illness. Can he get it back? Or can someone help him to get it back or something?
How was he transferred it, madam?
He has done it maybe due to mania.
No, how? Gift sale, what are the mode?
As a gift.
If it is an irrevocable gift, I am afraid he can't do anything. Gifts are usually irrevocable. He has to challenge the gift deed in the court of law, but he would be attacking his own deed which he has executed.
No, sir, so I think the issue there would be the capacity.
Capacity has to be examined again.
Yeah.
At the time of execution of the deed.
Even the donations are not safe. Even it is safe with the donations also.
Donations are gifts.
Okay, so I'm back online again. There was an instance at Scarf where there was a person who actually did a bank transfer of a huge amount of money. I think he about almost 5 lakhs of rupees he transferred to Scarf online. But that was when he was not in he was not well at that time. He had a diagnosis of bipolar disorder and he was in a hypomanic state when he did the transfer. Ordinarily, they could have just kept quiet about it. But then his wife approached us and said that they were in a very dire circumstances and he had actually borrowed the money to donate it to Scarf. And it was a perfectly legal online transfer. Now, the family approached us back so that we been requesting us to return the money because obviously it was something that he should not have done. We did return the money after examining the patient. We proved that he was not in a, he was in a hypomanic state and it was all documented and done properly. But this was okay because it was like within access to us and the wife approached us immediately. It was possible that we could actually do the transfer. We had to go through a whole lot of auditing headaches for that, but that's a different story. Now, in such instances, how does the family protect themselves against such kind of occurrences?
The best, easiest solution I could think of is to have a joint account.